3, 2, 1. Look, we think that the fact is that we live in a society where the majority of people who are at the bottom of society really do get there because of randomness and not because of how hard they try. And no matter how hard they try, they're going to be stuck at the bottom rungs of society. We think that it is much better for us as a society to be able to help the most weakest people by the fact that we are going to think that they are not at fault for the place that they are at. So we're going to talk about welfare and how we think that this is going to change tomorrow. We're going to talk about a little bit about how this affects just generally people on the personal level, just in terms of what we think that we're generally talking about. Right? So we think that this motion is about like the general beliefs of society, right? So we think that if today we maybe tend to think that people, if you work hard, you're going to succeed, your big successes and your big failures in life are attributed to whether you worked hard enough, what did you decide to do, how you decide to live your life. We think that we're going to attribute more of that to where you happen to be born, what your class happened to be, what family you were born in, random things that happened to you throughout your life. We think that probably people are not going to completely disregard personal choices on this side of the debate, because just as a person living in the world, you see that there is cause and effect, right? You see that if you work harder for your test, you still succeed in the test. You see that if you ask a girl out, she's more likely to go out with you than if you do not. And obviously on the other side of the house, people still see that luck plays a role to an extent, in the terms that they see that sometimes they work very hard and still no luck, right? But we think that this is really a question about how we view the big successes, the big failures that we have, the grand narrative, and not maybe the small decisions that we have on an everyday level. So let's talk about how this affects welfare, right? So I think that the thing is that many of the people that don't succeed today, it is not that they're not trying hard enough, it is not that they're not making all possible efforts. It is the fact that they're stuck in a system that is stacked against them, right? Because if you were born in the wrong neighborhood or born in the wrong family, it almost doesn't matter what you're going to do, you're unlikely to succeed. Because people that are born in low income households, they know like dozens of thousands fewer words of your vocabulary by the time they are 4 years old. They get much worse education because the education in those schools are not good enough. They don't have the social capital to be able to move on forward in life. When people who come from a higher class go to university, they can't afford to go to university because they must start working in whatever menial labor they can get in order to help their job overcome the debt, the families overcome the debt that they are in. And we think that these are massive gaps that are just unable to be filled by working a bit harder, like the narrative that we have today in our society. Right? What do we think changes today? Right? So we think that if today you have this strong narrative that the person who is making a large effort is going to succeed, that means that you think that people don't need a lot of help. If they would just work harder, they would be able to succeed. It's not something that society needs to fix as a whole, and therefore there is much less support for helping the poor. Also, if you think that this is a result of poor choices that they make, it doesn't matter how much welfare you're going to give them. It's not going to help, because you think probably these people are going to take all the money that they have and spend it in stupid ways because they're making bad choices. This is why they ended up poor in the first place. And as a result, there's no point in the states trying to hand out money to them. And thus there is no support for the welfare that is so necessary to move them forward. Right? We also think that the people who are very rich today, the people who are at the high ranks of society, they say, I earned this money. This is a result of me working hard, of the choices I made throughout my life. I deserve this money. And the government does not have the right to take that money from me. What happens tomorrow is that they feel like this is a gamble and I just got a good win in the lottery. But I'm not entitled to this money. This is not a money that I actually own. This is not something that I deserve to have bought. We think that under these circumstances, people are much more likely to feel, well, the difference between me and those people who are so much poorer than me is just arbitrary. There was no reason for them to have so much less success and such a harder life than the one I'm having. And thus I'm much more likely to want to help those people and to support them, right? We think that means that we're getting much more affirmative action, better education for the weaker places, we're getting better healthcare in these places, more infrastructure, and all of these things, meaning we're helping the people who really aren't able to move themselves forward today, because it is not a matter of the choices that they are making. Before we continue, CEO, yes.
So, what do you think is success on your side of the house?
Please repeat.
How do you define success on your side of the house?
How do we define success in our side of the house? Right. So we think that it may be that the definition of success changes somewhat. We think that is not necessarily a negative thing. For example, if people feel like they don't need to work 12 hours a day in order to be successful in their career and never have time for their families and friends, if they feel like they need to be, I don't know, spending a lot of money in order to make sure that they are viewed as the best people in the neighborhood and things like that, we think that probably we can change this completely, but probably the conception is better on our side of the house. Well, let's talk really about what happens on the personal level, right? We think that obviously many people, when they encounter failures, if they think that those failures are a result of the things that they have done, then it is much harder for them to deal with those failures and overcome them. They feel guilty. They feel like this is something that is very, like I have failed, I have done things that are wrong, I'm not good enough. And this leads them to think maybe they can never be good enough, maybe they're not going to be successful enough. It makes it much harder to deal with failures. Whereas if you believe that the failure is a result of just luck, you had bad luck, or at least a lot of it is bad luck, even if some of it is attributable to you. It's attributable to the things that you're doing, the choices that you make. It's much harder easier for you to deal with, right? But we also think when you're having successes, it is better for you to believe a large part of that success is attributable to luck. Why is that? We think that it might be that you get a high from success in the beginning, right? But we think that what happens in the long term is that now that you've been successful, you feel that you will stop being successful. You feel that you will not be able to put in the same efforts that you had to put in until now, that you might stop being as successful as you were because you are not going to make the correct choices that needs to be taken away from you. We think in a society that thinks that everything is up to luck, there is much more mechanisms where people are used to saying it's okay to be successful one time and not to be successful another, right? If I win one debate competition and then I don't break in the next debate competition, that is not because I have failed utterly and it means that I haven't been making the correct choices between these two competitions, but it means that things have been random. Sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. This is the way people are likely to create the narratives in this society because this is how they think about success and failures. And we think that as a result, when you're successful, you're still getting a better narrative in terms of working towards long-term happiness in your life. For all these reasons, please vote.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for that kind speech and call on the Leader of Opposition to open the case of the opposition bench.
So I think what this debate is about is first how we reach success, and then second how we evaluate success. And this is basically what opening opposition is going to prove in this debate, why it's better on our side of the house. I think that in the beginning, I think this generally tackles a lot of what we heard from opening argument, and we're presumably going to hear from closing argument, and what you hear all the time in these debates. And that's that sure people do not have like the same material positions, or they don't have the same education or race positions, and generally the society is different, and there are rich people, poor people, and people of privilege and people of not. But I think that what the fact of the matter is that success is always relative, and that is in relation to other factors. It's a relation to your abilities. For example, we don't measure success on the same grounds when we talk about Paralympics or Olympics. Your education background, like for some people it's a success that you go to high school, for some and finish it. For some people it's a success that you finish your PhD. For some people who are in extreme poverty, some other things are considered successful than if you were born in a family that makes, I don't know, like 7 figures and all that. So basically your surroundings and your social environment, for example, for some people, it's really successful if you ended up being a priest. In a liberal society where there's a lot of atheists, that wouldn't be considered much successful, but I don't know, in a conservative Catholic country, that's a really good thing. But also, for example, the culture plays a big part in this. For example, like in Croatia, if you would be really good in hockey, no one would fucking care. But if you're really good in football, people would be like, you're the biggest god ever and all that. So I think this is especially true for relations that don't cost money. And there are a lot of these relations, and sure, they are related to money, and they can say, oh, if you don't struggle to eat, I might be nicer to a cashier, or it might be easier for me, or I can help more, or I can spare more time if I'm not working 2 shifts to help people around my neighborhood. But generally, I think it's condescending, and it's wrong to say that there are some things which you can do in life which always costs money. And I think people do stuff like be nice, be supportive, be kind, and have success in relationships, in interpersonal relations, and support and respect in their community, and that doesn't necessarily cost them the money, and they are doing so in a community which is also deprived of money, right? So they're doing it then that inside of the community. And I think that as a consequence of these two pieces of framing, success on our side of the house is measured by the people of the group you generally belong to, which means random factors are in global society, in the country level, very huge and very important, let's say, in terms of this. But in your local community, they are not so important, because outside of the media shit where people are successful, if they are superstars and all of that, people on the ground, people you most likely are to interact with, that your whole life relates to, these people value success inside their groups. So for example, you didn't end up being reincarcerated in a poor neighborhood after you went to prison once, or you raised decent and happy kids and people are really proud of you, or you are really proud of you because you put a lot of effort into this, and this is what you deem as the pinnacle of your life, the most successful thing you do, which is that you raise the family, right? And I think that this is important as a piece of framing, because governments are going to try to, I say, dissuade this debate and push it to the side of, oh, if you don't have money, you're not successful anymore, and well, capitalism, bad, blah, blah, communism, all of that stuff. And I think that we have a huge part of the debate that we want to explore on our side of the house, where people don't need money, where people can, with their actions and with their position towards other people in society, make a change and become successful. And I think there are a couple of things that we stand behind. The first one is responsibility. On our side of the house, we put more emphasis on personal responsibility. This is important, I think, for a couple of things comparatively. Of course, there's personal responsibility on their side of the house, and people are not just going to go to jail and do drugs and all this, but comparatively, we have it more. And this is that people develop themselves more as independent individuals if there's a lot more personal responsibility going on. They care more about other people. They have in themselves an ability to face their actions and consequences. They become better parents. They become better marriage partners, friends, colleagues, through the process of learning how to be responsible. And this is important because it leads me to the next thing. And I think that a lot of the people, when we talk about really people who are screwed up, so these are the people that governments are going to talk about, these are the people who are going to be not successful on their standards, and therefore they're going to be, oh, it's easier for them if it's random than if it's the consequences of my actions, because I was like swimming against the current and all of that. And I think that we lose a lot of these people because exceptional individuals who break barriers and jump very high, these are people who grew up in extreme poverty and then finish college and become rich and become like what you could never even dream of in the group of people that you were born into. These are the people that we strive to the most, coming from a community that sees them as some sort of like role model, and sees them as a model of how to achieve something. And I think that on their side of the house, if everything is mostly based on random facts, and this was, I don't know, because at some point they scored better on the test, or they had the chance of meeting some person, and not on the hours they spent maybe studying or actually trying to do so, or, you know, doing the hard wrong against the easy no, and they didn't end up drinking or smoking weed, like, I don't know, most of us did, but they were actually studying for their exams, you know, like, so I think that these are role models in the community, and they incite the spark in people who want to strive for more. And these are one of the biggest motivators actually in these sort of situations for people who I think need this motivation to more. But I think that this has a lot of impacts generally on society. But before that, I want to take a closing argument to see what they have.
Lovro, if you are driving home drunk and I'm driving home drunk, why do I go to jail for murder just because there was a child on the road that I was on, but not a child on the road that you were on?
I really don't get how this is the case for your side. Because your side defends that we are both driving drunk because of a random fact. They found ourselves in the bar. And our side defends that you are driving drunk because you chose to drive drunk, and people should not drive drunk. And I think this is very simple. Okay, let's talk about impacts. So I think that upbringing of people, and this is like a more direct causation of what I was talking about. There's a causation between good acts and good outcomes that we instill in people. And sure, a lot of them are going to fail, but this general way of upbringing people, if you're a parent, is one of the best ways you can do and teach your parents, that if they strive hard, no matter what is, pushed against them, that they're going to have better outcomes. I'm not going to say that every time they're going to be successful, but this psychological, approach of grinding to get good things is something which is going to strengthen them, and they're going to be more resilient comparatively to what I'm going to talk about later, random facts, to what they are going to encounter later in life, where they're necessarily on both sides of the house going to suffer and face defeat. And they're going to internalize this on both sides of the house. They're not going to be like, oh, it's random, so we're not going to do anything about it. And this also applies to economy, like corporations and companies. The promotions, the culture of employment is based on our contributions to the company and not on randomness. I think people feel better in this sort of working environment, and we all mostly have to work. I think that lastly, the psychology of randomness is what keeps people asking themselves if I could have been somewhere different on a different place and all of that. And that's comparatively worse than asking yourself if I could have done more in order to achieve or overcome some of the obstacles. And that's why you vote open opposition.
I would like to thank the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. I call on the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case of open comment.
Gonna start this debate in 3, 2, 1. Look, the reason that we're going to win already from OG is simply because truth is on our side. It's really, really important here to recognize the extent and the depth to which randomness plays a massive part in every aspect of everyone's lives. Of course, when we look at this in terms of like class differences or things along those lines, that's where it becomes the most stark, but it's also true in every aspect of what it means to be a human being in this world. The extent to which you have control over your life versus the extent to which random situational factors actually affect your life is massive. Why is this so important? It's because only when we recognize what is true do we have the ability to form policy that actually allows us to create the best possibilities that we have. I'm going to engage with what we got from the opening, and then I'm going to go on to explain to you how we think this changes policy on a massive level, even beyond the things that we talked about when it comes to social mobility and why those things are so important. Let's see how that goes. So look, first of all, like notice that we have almost no engagement with the massive amounts of analysis that Neta gives you on the extent to which like social mobility is almost not a thing in the vast majority of countries. The extent to which those gaps are so massive already from a young age that no matter how hard you work, you don't have the resources around you to make to make yourself better. You don't have you're not going to get given a chance because you speak like with the wrong vocabulary and you haven't read the right things, and it doesn't matter how smart you are and how hard you work, you're not going to have access to the tools to get you to those places and all the things that she talks about. There's basically almost no engagement with that and how we're making a massive change in a way that is the most important thing in 1 second. Let's listen to what we did get though, because we heard the following things. One, they told us, well, it's okay because people don't actually compare themselves to like other people. They only compare themselves to their immediate surroundings. So it's not such a big deal. What's the problem? And this we say, like, one, factually 100% false, right? People who live in societies look at the media that is around them, look at what is like idolized by the societies, look at where they're told that they should be able to be and where other people tell them you should be able to get here if you work hard enough, and etc., etc. And when they consistently and constantly fail, they blame themselves and other people blame them as well and tell them, well, look, this one person managed to succeed when they worked hard enough. They're supposed to be a role model. Why aren't you getting there? And that means that we're not forming the welfare that we're supposed to be forming and all the things like that. But second of all, we just think that it's not a question of if you feel bad, right? Like feelings matter, but they don't matter that much. What actually matters is literal actual capability to have access to economic mobility, to have access to control over your life, to have access to reasonable healthcare and reasonable education that allows you to form the policies that you need for yourself. It's not a question of feeling bad, it's a question of being given the things that you actually need in order to live a reasonable lifestyle. Neta gives you a ton of analysis on why that isn't going to happen on their side of the house. No response at this point, right? So we think that already there, we're in a great position. But then they go on and tell us, look, but on the other hand, we want these people to take personal responsibility and see that they have these wrong role models or things along those lines, and therefore they're gonna, when they see that, it makes them actually want to work harder and makes them take their own, like think about whether they're good parents or not good parents or things along those lines, right? So we think a couple of things here. One, we want to be clear, there's an extent to which this still exists, and we obviously don't think that like everyone agrees that no one is just sitting at home and magically hoping that they will get out of poverty or anything like that. So we think that here there's still an extent in terms of drawing inspiration on the extent that you do have an effect in your life, what it is that you can do, and looking at those people, etc. But second of all, we just think that because like we're in a much better position to actually help these people. Why? Whether it's when you're literally, the fact is that you are stuck behind all of the lack of social mobility that Neta tells you about, then the fact that you have role models and you try really hard, but then you are in the vast majority of cases, 90% of cases, going to fail. I don't care that you have those role models. It's much, much more important that we literally actually give you the tools and we convince people that that is the right thing to do. And that only happens on our side of the house, on our narrative, where they don't see the money as their own, where they don't see the failures of other people as their fault, etc. So we think that in that sense, we're just getting much, much more of that because we don't care. But we also think that even if you're not looking at those cost differences, the question of whether or not I am going to be a good mother is much, much, much more dependent on whether the society around me has shaped me and given me the ability to do that, in the sense of whether they've given me, for instance, like the tools to be a good mother in terms of giving me the time that I need to take care of my child and building up my job such that I'm able to leave it at the right time and not face sanctions or things along those lines, whether they've given me the right education and formation of that policy towards that, etc., etc. And obviously there are personal differences between those things, but the extent to which you're shaped by the culture around you and you're shaped by the actual possibilities and the literal options that you have is much, much greater, because there are a million more factors that are around you than there are your personal abilities. And so we say that even if what we're talking about is that, and even if people take less personal responsibility, if we're actually shaping culture in the best way, if we're actually engaging with that in the best way and taking into account the things that we need to be taking into account in terms of forming that policy and recognizing that at the end of the day, what shapes people is much, much more societal changes than their own little personal choices, that is the point at which we also get any benefits that aren't only about this, that come from the other side. Before I continue to talk to you a little bit more about some weighing, let's take a PY from closing. Talk to me.
So free choice is probably not a thing, since neurons are quite deterministic and their implications on our bodies is. Do you prefer society in which people believe there's no free choice?
Okay, interesting sense of nihilism happening here. So like one, we think that insofar as we think that this is not to the debate, and it's important to notice the distinction here. The reason that there's a distinction is because we think that people still feel a sense of agency over their life. They still feel like they have some possibility of change. They recognize that their actions have immediate consequences, which doesn't leave everyone just sitting at home crying on their sofas, because they do have some aspects of choices. And we think that given that we get that level of nuance, we don't get all of the harms that would come from a completely nihilistic view. But second of all, insofar as if we were in a view with there's no free choice, that would still allow us to actually shape policy in a way that would allow the most people to get the things that they need, and you actually prove that to be the case, then sure, maybe we would agree with that. We have no problem with that either. Look, at the end of the day, here's what we're telling you. Insofar as we are the ones who engage with getting people the policy that they need and actually achieving the goals that we have, we think that this is the most important thing in the debate for several reasons. One, we think that the large-scale welfare that in pursuit we only get on our side, or are far, far more likely to get on our side, helps the most vulnerable people in our society in terms of the ones being needed. We don't really care if some people feel a little bit worse or feel slightly less motivated to take actions, if mostly what we're doing is actually giving the basic necessities to these people. We think those are just more important. Second of all, we think that we are just the ones who are being the most actually helpful, insofar as the fact of the matter is that in our society, what makes a big difference is the actual surroundings and is the choices that you have open to you. Even if there's a certain sense in which people are going to take less personal responsibility or anything along those lines, to the extent that we are actually the ones being the most helpful and providing the tools that will actually give the most people the ability to do any of the things that oppositions and governments want in this debate. That is why we think those are the most important. Please propose.
I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech and call on the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close out the top half. Here.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm going to continue the analysis of why we think that eventually their side is harming poor people and people that are disenfranchised even more, to the extent where if today some of them at least had the ability to improve their lives, now even less would do that, if any at all, and they are going to see a fate that is going to be worse. And then I'm going to talk about progress and why it's not only motivational of people, but why this is actually the kind of thing that can solve humanity's problem. Our only chance of actually meeting the challenges that we have with climate, our only ways of changing systems at large, curing cancer and so on, is reliant on the fact that people do want this selfish credit and do see themselves as having more abilities than they do and not seeing life as random, and why that is so important. But before that, let's start with a quick point of extraneous rebuttal, because notice that we get a false dichotomy coming from opening government, basically saying that society requires that I am perfect, that if I fail in a choice, I'm this horrible person. Notice that already in the 60s, countries, we had psychologists talking about good enough mothers, good enough people. We don't think that this is outside of the scope of the debate to say that we still as a society accept that there is a bar that you can meet in terms of what makes you good or not within your choices. You don't always have to be the best. I think that this is a different debate. The question is, do you have the ability to influence your life, which is what we're talking about. But then notice that the case from opening government then relies on this massive assertion saying there is no mobility at all. First of all, factually wrong. I think that most of us in this room are the children of immigrants, are people that have made it through life and have succeeded, although the circumstances were not always on our side. I think that not all countries are the United States, and thank God for that, because there are ways of actually trying to mobilize yourself. We don't accept that this is as radical and as extreme, and we do hear of many cases of people that have lifted themselves from poverty and from horrible circumstances and are doing very well despite that happening. So we don't think that this is true. But also notice that on their world there isn't going to be a change. Why? So here I think that even if things are seen to be random, people would still try to adopt different narratives in order to justify why the people on top should stay on top. Where do we see that? In the Middle Ages. We had no concept of choices because you had the nobility. So what did they tell others in order to feel superior? They said that God is on their side, which is the most random factor that can happen. So yes, sure, they didn't say the poor are bad because they made poor choices. They just said they are not that human beings. We think that even if you have random factors, the people in power have the ability to manipulate those random factors into institutions of power that then still depress the people. So then this means that we don't get the benefits that opening government wants us so much. Moreover, we think that perceptions of people of themselves don't use statistics in the proper way that scientists do. We don't think that people are that good. We think that people have a tendency, first of all, to think that luck can be on their side, or more than that, to read patterns where they don't exist. And those patterns are going to be seen on the basis of how other people view themselves. So notice that since xenophobia is still going to be a thing, since dressing poorly is still going to be a thing, living in a poor neighborhood is still going to be a thing, what is this going to do? So the rich and the people that are on top are not going to change their outlook on other people in society in the world of randomness, because they would still see themselves as morally superior because they look nicer. But this also means that people at the bottom have more chances of then internalizing that the statistical patterns are constantly going against them, or at least they would feel worse about things that are happening due to random reasons. A, because it still really, really sucks when something very bad happens to you, but B, because there are going to be people who tell them, yeah, look, things are not going out for you, you know, you're an unlucky person. But moreover, those randomness is the kind of thing that they experience according to opening government. Every time, it's their neighborhood, it's their parents. If my dad was an alcoholic, I'm going to be an alcoholic. Now, why is that such a bad thing? Because if I internalize that I am below other people, that I have no way of changing my life because society is so much against me, then this means that I don't even try. Because even according to their logic, if I do have a small amount of agency, why would I still use it if I'm going to fail eventually? There is no point for me to do that. There is no point to try to go to university because it's really hard. There is no point to ask for help because it would only humiliate me. But notice that on the other side, when people feel that there is a chance, even if it's hopeless, big things are happening. In India, there is a shift in the caste system because people who have been told by that nothing could become of them did internalize the Western concept of a personal choice that they can make in order to advance themselves. And we think that we lose that on their side. Before I continue, CG.
If the fact that I'm Muslim was simply because I was born in Pakistan, and the fact that I'm Hindu was simply because I was born in India, would Muslims and Hindus fight that much?
Yes. People always make up stories about us and them. People are really bad like that. So we think that this means that it doesn't matter. At least now we have more of a choice. Now, this also leads me to the great people, because from opening government, we get, look, people feel really bad about themselves and they have this anxiety. We say that when it comes to people from middle classes and above, it's really good to have those anxious people who felt like the love of their mother is dependent on them making good choices. Why? Because in order to take major risks, you need to know that you have the ability to do that. You can't just say, okay, I'll throw a dice and maybe I'll lose a lot of money. Maybe I wouldn't have anything. Those are the kind of people that need to say, I have so much to gain and I have so many abilities because I can make good choices that now I take on the adventure. We think that in their world, we wouldn't have those people to be motivated at all, because they would be more risk averse because they have a nice house. They have already good things. And then this means that we eventually lose out on things that help universally everyone, because cancer is something that everyone has, because climate affects us all. So we want to have those people. They might feel bad a bit, but we will all feel much better.
I would like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and all speakers in the top half for an excellent top half, and now welcome the Member of Government to extend on the proposition bench.
On the government side in this debate, people would believe that the fact that I am white is random, but I think what's more important is that people know that the fact that being white imported in our society is random. Our extension is going to be about how this belief destroys structures of hierarchy, tribalism, ways in which we categorize different people in different groups and use that to entrench power structures. Because note, if you believe in probably randomness, there is an equally likely alternate reality where Africa is the most successful and developed continent, where Islam is the most peaceful religion. Hamza PY's Monica and asks about, like conflict. If you believe that, like the religion that you happen to be in and where you happen to live is all random, would we have conflict? And her reply is that yes, because people always make up stories about us and them. That's exactly the point, right? Because if the story is random, there can be no us and them, because us and them always stems from underlying myths about where conflict comes from and where differences come from. But if you believe that all characteristics of people embody are random, then there's no push behind these kind of stories, because it's just randomly and arbitrary and doesn't have meaning, as opposed to the comparative, which is where you create conflict and hierarchies between groups, because you can ascribe meaning to certain characteristics which groups chose, rather than were just randomly assigned by virtue of the birth lottery. How is this going to fit into the debate? Because I think opening government did a really good job of talking about redistribution. I think all their impacts about welfare are true, about helping the most vulnerable. But here's the limitation of opening government, because when you are you're helping the most vulnerable behind the veil of ignorance, this does mean that you support the lowest performing or the most vulnerable group, but in the group in which you also participate, right? Because you're insulating yourself against the risk from random factors. I'm exposed to certain random factors by virtue of my group, right? So it's random that I'm born into like a white middle-class British society. Now I protect the most vulnerable white British middle class people, because I know that it's random that I might be dragged into that. But the limitation is that it only goes beyond your self-interest, right? Because opening government never talk about how this breaks down any conceptions of why me being in a particular position in society is worth anything or has certain connotations in the first place. I think this is particularly important because we're going to show to you how this removes the way we think about hierarchies, the way we think about social categories. And note, if we prove this, this is a necessary link to show that redistribution happens in the most fairest and best way to everyone, rather than just people redistributing to their own group because they know that random luck might mean they get the worst off within their own group, right? Because just because you're born into a particular group randomly doesn't mean that you're not facing particular random choices which are made more likely by virtue of you being in that group. I think if you break down any kind of hierarchies, any kind of thinking in terms of sort of social categories and tribalism, that's the only way you get the most powerful redistribution, because you don't see any limitations between what you share with other people, because it's all random. I'm going to explain this extension and then I'm going to explain how it impacts OO at the end, because I think the judges' heads will be hurting enough and I don't want to make that worse, and I think this will be clear. How do we get less tribalism? I think the most important thing here is that there's solidarity when everyone is equally vulnerable to random factors, because advantages and disadvantages are incredibly random, right? But the implication of this is that currently, or in the world where we value personal choices, when anyone of any nationality or ethnicity or any social group succeed, we equate that success or failure with that particular group, right? Because people have a superficial understanding of personal choice. Like, it can be all nuanced about agency, whatever, but what people realistically do is conflate the choices they made with the characteristics of that person and then ascribe value to them. So when Steve Jobs succeed, it's like, oh, America is great. When minorities do things, it's like, oh, they did well for that token minority, because we associate their choices within the paradigm or the identities which we see them as having made the choice to opt into. That's particularly important. I think the comparative is that randomness means we destigmatize groups because you are who you are, literally because of randomness. Like identitarian factors mean nothing because you accumulated them randomly as opposed to them being an active choice which you opted into, which is the biggest push factor behind us categorizing people based on their identity, based on cultural religious groups, because we see that as an active choice and therefore morally meaningful as opposed to just randomly. I think this means that now you believe that the fact that you were radicalized and became a terrorist is random, not related to the choice to be Muslim. Even if we're talking about positive stereotypes, the fact that you are smart and hardworking is random as opposed to because you were like Chinese or another like ethnicity which has these kind of characteristics associated with them. Again, OP can make nuanced differentiations of the way in which agency works in different situations, but people don't perceive it. People perceive personal choices as conflated to the identity of the person who makes those choices, which is why believing this means you ascribe values of success and failure to those groups rather than just to those individuals. The implication of this is that we don't categorize people, but I think in closing government we go further and say that even if you still categorize people, because randomness is arbitrary and therefore is morally meaningless, there's no value in like differentiating between different people because it's just not significant, right? Because it's incredibly random as opposed to something which is significant, which means that you don't glorify particular groups who have particular outcomes because it's random they managed to achieve that. I think that means that you don't glorify like powerful rich white groups, you don't glorify European legacies and the power and privilege they accumulated because that was random choice rather than them the choice. Sorry, that was random luck as opposed to them making the choice to be more civilized and hence earning that. I think that's how you break down narratives of power and hierarchy, which are a necessary precondition to any kind of perfect or best redistribution which opening government wants to reach, and any kind of equal outcomes which opening opposition wants to reach. And PYOO, yes.
So do you think it's random that the past 3 Euros have been won, or the top speaker has been a female speaker of color?
I mean, yes, it's not because they're women, because like there's lots of advantages that you have to overcome to do that. I think there's a lot of randomness which goes into these things. But okay, actually, I'm gonna focus on explain that better by looking at the implications in OO, because they OO talk about personal responsibility. They talk about role models of people succeeding. I think the mechanisms that OO give for how you succeed based on role models is like their literal logic makes you confined to the community in which you aspire to, right? Because you see role models in the place, you want to emulate the personal choices of the people that you look up to, and therefore you see the role models of, which creates path dependency within certain communities who follow certain trajectories because they have certain goals based on the people they look up to. This is important, right? Because then you self-select the role models within the community you associate yourself with. That's how people get kept in boxes. That's how communities become insular because they have different aspirations. That's how you allow power hierarchies to get entrenched, because one group can oppress another if they keep following the same pattern, and hence like one group can accumulate more capital and one not. This is important, right? Because opposition are wrong to conflate personal choices and hard work. These are two different concepts. I'm sure the words in the motion were choosing for a reason, right? Because whether you choose your path or whether you're randomly given your path, you can work hard within either of those paradigms, right? That's particularly important. So it's about how you choose and breaking free from the social categories which dictate what you want to succeed in, as opposed to how hard you work within them. In closing government, we want to free people from choosing trajectories which aid social tribalism and conflict, because we think in certain predetermined boxes, because we recognize that now we recognize that all characteristics are incredibly random. All choices don't have like moral value or moral significance or are better than other, because on the comparative where you naturally attract value to certain choices and hence value to the groups who tend to choose those choices, you legitimize narratives of those groups belonging to particular choices. So even in opening opposition's best metric of you choosing success and therefore like that's how you succeed, it's still within confines, which means that groups don't break out of social inequality. You still create power hierarchies, you still create conflict and tribalism. And our side people work hard, but they don't do it based on what they think they should do, based on the choices their group have made. They do it well, it's random, so you're not confined by these. That is massively important for equality. I'm very proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Member of Government for that fine speech and call on the Member of Opposition to extend on the opposition bid.
Cool. Do you hear me? Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Framing. This debate needs it, and it deals with both governments. 1. People are not idiots. On both sides of the house and in both societies, we still have awareness of the obstacles facing people. So the fact there is a favela in Rio de Janeiro is still visible to individuals. This means we're still aware of things like poverty. This therefore means that the threshold you set yourself as a person who is acutely aware of the fact that they are poor, and the threshold society sets for potential success is not the same as the threshold set for a potentially rich person, which means that the dealing with failure point from OG probably becomes moot at the point where you can simultaneously be aware of your conditions and know that success is not measured the same for everyone, while still believing in personal choice. What does this mean? This means that within your poverty, you still have a window of choice. You may go to a school in Harlem. It is, however, your choice whether you will drop out or not. And if you not drop out, potentially go to community college and be able to feed yourself and your child. To the extent to which this narrative encourages people to do that, and if they fail, learn from their failure, believing they can change things in the future, we say the narrative in and of itself is legitimate because the message we send is you can still change something as opposed to factors will always overpower you. We say this probably also translates into policy to a certain extent, because if we believe in meritocracy as a society and we believe that personal choices should be the thing determining our success, if we see anomalies stopping that from happening, we're likely to want to change that as a society, whereas on their side, they never give you mechanisms for that change. I'll talk more about that later. Therefore, we say on that we win. But then closing government comes and says, yeah, but arbitrary definitions create conflict, and that's a problem. Closing government conflates the idea of arbitrary with meaningless. Know that everybody knows that black people did not have like a Skyrim interface choosing to be black. However, they still ascribe meaning to the fact that people are black. Racists believe it is inherent to blackness that there is a culture of poverty, regardless of whether it's a consequence of a choice. If I think Hamas are terrorists, they're still terrorists, even if they were educated or coerced to be Muslims and not choosing that themselves. This means in terms of their claim on redistribution, resentment is still likely to happen. If you are born of conditions that make you to be rich, you're simply more likely to believe that your heritage, your family, your race, and your bloodline are more suited to richness than inherently others. This is the root of racism. This is what the entire historical idea of aristocracy was based on. Given this the entire assumption of closing government, and historically incorrect, I do not see how they can win this debate. That seems to be a problem. Moving on to our case. Let's tackle governments at their best. We are happy to agree with open government completely, that the living conditions of disenfranchised are shit. Let's discuss how we can change them. Note that progressive opinions tend to be unpopular opinions in most cases, because they take away money from the richer ones, because they mean affirmative action, because they mean higher taxation. Therefore, they do not happen by inertia. They have to happen as a result of political change. Political change takes the form of pressure on government, which make them believe that it is their incentive to act in the favor of a certain group. This tends to take the form of voting, protest, and similar classical types of political action. Note that if success is a consequence of random characteristics, there is no reason to make that trade-off, because there's always a trade-off involved, be it taking the time to vote rather than cooking lunch for your children, or even worse, getting hit by a baton on the head because you met a very angry policeman. This means that on their side of the house, you're likely as an individual person to believe that your actions change nothing, because the random factors are the determinants of success, given that they're largely against you on their side of the house. So your action changes nothing, therefore the trade-off has more harms involved than benefits. Therefore, everybody thinks they cannot change anything, they do not act. Our narrative on our side of the house is a narrative of personal responsibility. Your choices, if you take action, despite your situation, may change something. And there's an element of personal and moral guilt if not. But this has to work for government to have impact. So we're happy to write on this. An example is Barack Obama saying, I realize all of the harms noted by the black people. However, it is your responsibility to go out and vote. Even if you don't elect a president, you may elect a mayor, you may elect a local councillor, go to a town hall meeting and make pressure, because if you do not, then America can no longer be the one responsible for your harms. And this is also a piece of framing. This narrative is very often promulgated by individuals who are respected in society, pop icons and political leaders, which actually lend this encouragement. This therefore means that on our side of the house, we get a narrative, we can, which tends to be the narrative of most political movements that change something. Not Podemos in Spain, which led to new labor laws, is the translation of we can. This is a narrative that motivates people to act, therefore incentivizes more political change, therefore beats opening opposition, because it kind of solves the motivation clash to a certain extent, because it means we lower the threshold and we negate the conditions that necessitate this motivation to have to be so high. That's a comparative. Nobody else had it. We win. Cool. But secondly, we want to debate on the idea of success, because everybody seems to define success in material terms. Even Lovro, because his definition of non-material is like only local communities, but outside of it is material. not sure we completely agree. We said people can define their success in non-material terms. Found a family, have a house, go to a trip, or similar things. But note what the comparative is here. And this is what opening opposition never does for you. On their side of the house, this kind of definition of success is heavily disincentivized. Because if factors, random factors, are a determinant of your success, for disenfranchised people, these factors are largely negative. The most of the random factors as a poor person are that you are poor, or that you are black, or that you are a Muslim in Germany. This therefore means that if you focus on random factors, these factors are more likely to lead you to a lack of success, therefore make you more likely to define success materially. Before explaining this in more depth, open it.
Even believing my personal success is a result of luck, I still understand the cause and effect of voting and protests. But the question of where I'm more likely to succeed is whether that narrative is going to work in terms of rich people being willing to give up their money and not think I'm just going to squander it on nothing.
I get that. One, this seems to be symmetrical in what says the house. Two, you seem to be under the assumption that even like the lottery is the pure definition of luck. I don't see people giving away their lottery winnings. My analysis earlier proved this. Should have listened to it. Cool. Back to my point. If your factors that determine your condition are negative, this means that you are likely to define your condition as a consequence of what those factors produce, which tends to be poverty, which is a material definition. On our side of the house, you're more likely to have the idea of agency to make a personal choice to escape material confines despite your poverty and settle on something else, specifically because it's going to be framed as a positive narrative. It's taught in schools by parents, by people who want you to believe them. Therefore, we get more agency on our side of the house. But lastly, there's a point on morality. Note that the crux of morality is the idea that actions have consequences. I have to take responsibility for them. At the point where you can abdicate responsibility on the level of saying, I was born this way, it's not my choice, you're less likely to get people who buy into morals and treating people well and not be assholes. An example, corporate culture where everybody's a fucking cutthroat because you have to do it. That's what the culture is. We think that's horrible. We have a lot of extensions, and that means we will.
I would like to thank the member of opposition for that fine speech and call on the government whip to summarize this debate for side government.
Did you hear me? You want to do on timer?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I can do this one too. I can do it now.
Closing opposition, the debate more broadly, suffers from a lack of imagination because our argument was never that being white is random. Our argument was that being white is important is random. There is an alternative history where the same value could be attached to being black or being Asian or being brown. What that means then is this debate isn't about us entrenching neo-Nazi ideologies as they accuse us of, but however, this debate is about how neo-Nazi ideologies never make any sense because the fact that being white, even if it is important, is utterly random because it could have been any other way. Opening government suffers the same lack of imagination because opening government wants to have a wealth redistributive program towards the poor. One, Ciara gave you reasons for why this is likely to happen within your own communities as opposed to across different communities. But secondly, and much more crucially, they suffer from the same lack of imagination insofar as what we say is being wealthy, being important is random. So we want to envision a world where you don't just give wealth to the poor, but attempt to create a society where any random factor has less relevance. That is the most equal society all of us can strive for, and that is what closing government brought you today. 4 comments on closing opposition. Number 1, the kid in the favela in Brazil believing that he can succeed is the worst fucking thing that ever happened to that kid. I think the American dream is arguably the worst ideology in the history of humankind because it gives you hope where there is none. Crucially, panel, opening opposition is equally vulnerable to this response. And why is that true? Because the clash on opening was interesting. Opening government would say that you have no responsibility for your actions, so the failures seem less bad. Opening opposition and closing opposition would say, but when you do have responsibility for your actions, the successes seem much good. What they forget is the empirical reality that for the vast majority of people on this planet, failures happen a lot more fucking often than successes do. This is just literally true. For the vast majority of people living on this planet, their life is a series of failures, and they never have successes as they are defined within our society. Number two, comment on closing opposition, meritocracy can never exist. Even in the most equal society on the planet, the point at which you have worked hard, your children don't have to work hard. So at best, meritocracy occurs for 20 years, never forever. Number three, change and progress occurs on our side, not your side. Why is that? This also responds to Lovro's point of information. For instance, when a woman is best speaker of Euros, you know what the reaction is? Sexism doesn't exist in the European debate circuit anymore. I think that's a fucking horrible response because that's not how we should think about it. Because as Ciara said, we take the successes of individuals and tether them to communities. Suddenly, someone being best speaker means women are better off, even though that person is an individual and their success was informed by individual legacies, which had nothing to do with them being a woman. This is equally true for people like Obama, because one, we want to live in a society where you don't need someone black to push black policies because being black is irrelevant. But number two, even in the best case where you get Obama through, you think racism is solved because you tether the success of the individual with the success of the community. And we think that's a horrible thing to do because the most vulnerable within that community are always the people who are worse off. I think closing opposition is out. They had one final claim in this, which was shared by opening opposition, the slightly disingenuous 10, which was to do a claim with moral responsibility and agency. Basically, we want to live in a society where moral responsibility is tethered to our freedom to do things. I think that's stupid. And that's why I give Lovro a POI, where I said if both of you and me are driving drunk, and one of us crashes into a kid because a kid was on the road on my road but not yours, why am I more responsible? We did exactly the same thing. We both drove home drunk. It's extremely unclear to me in a society where two people can do equally symmetrical actions but face different consequences, why that's more moral than what they are pushing for. Comments on opening opposition. Number one, this idea that success is relative is, in my opinion, very limited. Lovro, you might be one of the best speakers from the ESL community, but the ESL fucking final still happens before the open final, the one that everyone watches. The problem with their argument is that even if you succeed relative to the frame of your community, in a more meta and larger context sense, you still fail because the success of your community is never taken in light of the success of other communities. Number two, I think it's equally important to point out that risks and good luck exist on both sides. What does that mean? I think it's very unfair for Monica to say that we are very risk averse because we never take any risk, but you take risk because you have personal choices. That's fucking not true, because we can believe that good luck is on our side, or we have the simple attitude many of us have in life. You know, you never know with this argument, so might as well run it. This is a psychological attitude so many of us have. You never know if you're going to get that job, so might as well put in that application. You develop a certain apathy because you can't control the circumstances, which means that you become luck maximizing as opposed to risk averse. That argument did not make sense. But the third thing that I say is, imagine living in a world, as I said, where the vast majority of people live, where you believe that you can succeed and you constantly fail. In that world, all they're setting them up for is disappointment. So even if Ciara's extension is untrue, Neta and Miriam's opening argument extension is untrue, what opposition bench is doing is saying, we're going to keep telling you that you will succeed and you will keep on failing. I think even in our world, they're both poor, but at least we're not fucking disappointing them all the time. I'm going to take opening for fairness and then talk about how we weigh up against OG. Please. Opening.
Okay. So we would rather have sub-bastards trying to degrade women's achievement rather than those women refusing to debate at all because they've heard stories of phallic superiority that is not up to their control.
Okay, no, that's literally what we're saying, that the fact that phallic superiority is superior is irrelevant. Like, again, Monica, I've said this 4 times now. The factor being important is random, not you having the factor is random. Weighing us up against opening government. 3 reasons why we win against them. 1, the original position from which they start this case is downstream of ours, because they assume that the only game in town is wealth redistribution. We say that that's an unequal society, even if you achieve it, because the fact that wealth is a criteria of success is inherently unjust. Because we might live in a society where wealth does not matter and your moral character matters. Hence, we get more equality on our side. 2, as Ciara showed you, even if they get well redistribution, it's likely to happen in their in-groups. So for instance, with the most poor people in the British community, more people in the Iraqi community. But 3, it leads to a glorification of history, where the European civilization is seen as the bastion of progress for humanity, and even every success they've had is utterly random. Panel, we showed to you why this leads to inherent tribalism and war. We want to take that away because who we are is random. Very, very proud to propose.
I would like to thank the government with the fine speech and call on the opposition whip to close out opposition bench, the debate, and the tournament as a whole.
Can you hear me? Cool beans. 3, 2, 1. Let's make it simple. 2 questions debate. Firstly, where do we get more social change? Secondly, where do we have happier individuals at the end of this debate, and how does this affect people on the individual level? Rebuttal is going to be integrated. Let's start with the first question of where do we have more social change? Here we have 2 claims from each government team. Opening government make the following claim. People realize that they are wealthy because of random factors. Therefore, they are likely to now give this away. Why is that? Because under status quo, they don't give it away because they think people would waste that money or it is their fault. A couple of responses to that, all of them are actually already inside Lovro's speech. Firstly, I think that the lottery analogy and example is very interesting in this debate. Note that this is the definition of luck, and yet, as far as I know, 100% of these people keep the money. Do you know why is that the case? Because even if it's for random factors, most people prefer being richer than poor and prefer keeping their money to their own than to giving it to the other side, to other people. Believing that things are for random factors doesn't make me more charitable, more empathetic, or a better person in any way. This is just not a consequence of this debate. Secondly, I'm sorry, I just don't accept the caricature of all people of like, the poor deserve it. Maybe they just, A, care for the money they have and don't want to be poor. B, think that taxation has other effects that might be harmful to the economy or interest of people to work. People are not just like those mean individuals. But most importantly, note, and this is specifically about the part of like, oh, they don't give the money because they think they'll waste it. This doesn't change in the debate one bit. If anything, it could become worse because you don't believe that people are able to the same extent to decide to overcome their background. So if I believe under status quo that poor people are more likely to drink or smoke and gamble, and there are reasons in society for that to be true. If you are poor and your life kind of sucked more than other individuals, I get it why you want to run away with alcohol. It's just a logical decision. But other way, people perceive it in a bad way. That doesn't change. Meaning, we're just very, very unlikely at the end of this debate to see the actual changes that opening government want. Oh, one last response. If we get the framing from Neta that people can still tie cause and effect, they are still very likely to believe that those who have succeeded from this minority group have done so because they have tried harder than others, and therefore still be able to believe that others just haven't tried hard enough. And sure, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe they were born this way. But why do they deserve my money? Just unclear why any of those people changed to any extent. Secondly, CG's extension. So there are 2 parts to this quote-unquote extension. So let's assume that the part of like random factors means that there is no hatred or superiority as an extension. I think there are a couple of important issues with that. Firstly, they never engage with the rebuttal that team gives them that seems to kind of destroy most of their case about wars. Given that circumstances still exist, it is unclear why I change my mind about populations that I view as enemies of me. It is unclear why the fact that I think that people in the Gaza Strip are indoctrinated and have no choice, and Hamas is there for arbitrary reasons and random factors, means that I am less likely to view them as a threat and treat them as such. Secondly, note, I have no idea why specifically viewing success and failure creates this sort of narrative. They're just not talking about the debate. They're talking about complete randomness of almost all characteristics, not specifically about success and failures. But moreover, we say, they try to redefine the debate, fine, don't care about that. I think that the part about, look, they're just like, we don't ascribe meaning to random things, besides citing OG, is problematic. The assumption there is that groups don't have mutual characteristics under their side of the house, and therefore people don't ascribe meaning to being a part of the group. I think that is very, very unlikely. People are born into different circumstances, cultures still exist, countries are in different situations in a lot of ways. Groups that are together and people who are drawn into each other are likely to be drawn on these characteristics, and therefore we're still likely to give weight and meaning to things that seem random or arbitrary because they do describe the groups and how they behave. That should probably be enough with both government teams. What do we tell you? Tell you something important. Opening government being correct is a horrible thing. It is true that as an individual, I don't have a lot of chance to change something significantly. We say that this is exactly why we need a narrative that counteracts that in order to solve collective action problems that exist all everywhere in society, specifically for minority groups. Tint tells you that when I think that the odds are stacked against me and society resonates that odds are stacked against me, I am less likely to take an action by myself. I have less choice, less of an ability to control the consequences. This means that in a lot of situations, like protests, like voting, when it does seem that my own personal choice has no meaning and has no weight, we must have a narrative that says quite strongly, or predominantly, that personal choices matter. For people to be able to overcome that barrier and to be able to come together to fight things, to be able to protest even though their own individual participation there is meaningless. Because if everyone thinks that way, we have no protests at all. Opening.
The reason socialist countries succeeded at enacting welfare programs is because they promoted the belief that the wealth is not deserved by me, that it was random, and that other people are going to be able to use it if I give it to them. It may not be always the perfect way of getting this, but it is a necessary condition for allowing welfare to exist.
Yeah, people being able to use this is under our side of the house because they can make the choices that would do so. The government can still convince people of that. This is just not the comparative in this debate, Miriam, I'm sorry. Then opening opposition tells us, look, you know, we can create huge social impact by having very successful people. According to OG, maybe they'll try more because they're not fearing to success. And according to governments in general, maybe people feel they have luck and they need to use that. We showed you when uniquely or aggravating social problems without proving any benefit from government side. Secondly, let's talk about the individual level. So Tint gives you a unique extension here that also gauges very well the responses we get from closing government. Under our side of the house, you are better able to define success in a different way. When it is not about circumstances and about me being poor, this is the only situation when you are more able to define attempting as a success. We're not giving them false hope. We're giving them the ability to define success differently and be happy, even if they are a poor kid in the favela. No response to that, by the way, from CG. For all these reasons, we beg you to oppose.
I would like to thank the opposition whip and all the speakers in the debate for a fantastic final. I assume we will now be taken to a breakout room where we can judge.